Is it the greatest archaeological discovery of all time or a gigantic leap of faith? An Australian scientist is part of a team convinced it's found the remains of Noah's Ark.
They drilled into the side of a ridge in eastern Turkey and lowered a camera into the opening. The feed came back, but the entire team went silent. Inside the tent, nobody spoke. No one reacted. And then, without explanation, the lead researcher stood up, walked outside, and never returned. The footage was never released. The site was quietly shut down, and every official record of what was seen has remained locked away from the public. So what did that camera actually capture deep beneath the surface? And why is it that everyone who was there suddenly refuses to talk about it? A ship on the wrong mountain. Everyone has been looking in the wrong place. For generations, searchers have thrown themselves at the slopes of Mount Ararat. Crampons, cameras, frostbite, and bad weather. Return after return with nothing but ice crystals and disappointment. The mountain has swallowed careers whole and given back nothing. The real site is roughly 20 miles south. A smaller, harder mountain, Mount Tenderek. The ground there is volcanic and fractured. The wind is relentless. The villages in the valley beneath it are among the oldest continuously settled places on the planet. And here is the thing you need to understand before anything else. The people who live in those villages have a name for the shape on the slope above them. They call it the ship. They have been calling it that for as long as their memory reaches back. Not because a scholar told them to, not because of a book. Because that is what it looks like from the valley floor when the light hits it right. From the ground, you can dismiss it. Just another ridge in a country full of ridges. Broken geology. Nothing special. From the air, the shape becomes something else entirely. Long, narrow, symmetrical at both ends, tapered like a hull, nearly 3 football fields from tip to tip. The outside world first caught a clear look at it in 1959. A Turkish military captain named İlhan Durupınar was flying a NATO reconnaissance mission when the outline appeared beneath his aircraft. He photographed it. Those photographs reached military analysts, and the whisper started. What if it had been sitting there the whole time? What stopped the laughter was the measurement. The shape on that slope runs approximately 515 feet in length. Genesis instructs Noah to build the ark at 300 cubits. Depending on which ancient cubit standard you apply, that converts to somewhere between 450 and 515 feet. The first researchers to run that comparison sat down on the cold ground and stared at their instruments for a long time before any of them said a word. They went home with the numbers written in their notebooks and no idea what to do with them. The Turkish government took it seriously enough to send an official team in 1960. That team came back with readings nobody could properly interpret at the time. They filed their report. They walked away. And for the better part of 5 decades, the mountain held whatever was underneath it in silence. What the radar saw. You need to grasp what ground-penetrating radar really does. It does not just confirm that something is buried. It maps the shape of it, the density, the internal layers. It slices through earth like a blade moving through paper and reads the cross-section. Three-dimensional subsurface imaging takes those separate slices and builds them into a clear picture. When a new study team brought that device to the Durupınar formation and activated it, the data started coming back almost immediately. It did not resemble simple dirt. It resembled built architecture. The scans showed long parallel lines running across the entire length of the formation. Right angles showed up in data. The kind of geometry natural processes almost never create unaided truly. What seemed to be horizontal floors stacked one above another there. Vertical divisions splitting the interior into discrete enclosed spaces. The word the researchers kept repeating in their audio recordings was compartments. Whatever was inside that form was split into rooms. Now pause on this. Genesis does not describe Noah's Ark as one single open chamber. It describes 3 decks, lower, middle, upper, and rooms throughout. Not some cargo hold. Rooms. The scans the team were extracting from that formation were matching that interpretation with an accuracy noon on site had been prepared for. They had arrived to disprove it. That was their working assumption. They expected to discover a geologic anomaly, that is, a volcanic structure formed by lava flow and erosion that would explain away every rumor and let everyone go home. Instead, they were observing 3 stacked levels divided into internal rooms buried within a mountain in the exact region the ancient text identifies. And that was only what surface scans could reach there. The radar could indicate the structure existed clearly. It could not reveal what was inside the rooms there. To discover that out, they were going to have to drill openings in the mountain. They began planning the drill sites that night. The flood isn't just one story. Before we reach what came out of those boreholes, you need to understand why this really matters beyond archaeology. Because the story behind this site does not belong to any tradition. The flood story is not a Hebrew invention. It is not a Christian creation. It is not the property of any one culture or text. It exists everywhere. Close to 200 separate cultures spread across every inhabited continent on Earth still carry a version of the same memory. A massive flood, a righteous survivor, a vessel, animals saved, a world rebuilt from nearly nothing. The Babylonians recorded the account on clay tablets thousands of years before Genesis existed in its current form. Their version describes a man named Utnapishtim, who built an enormous boat to survive a divinely sent great deluge. The structural details and dimensions match the biblical account in ways that are difficult to explain away as coincidence here. The British Museum holds a tablet describing a circular ark built from reeds and bitumen, with engineering specifications precise enough that when researchers built a replica to scale, it floated quite successfully. The ancient world was not only telling stories, it was preserving building knowledge. The Hindu tradition records Manu, warned by a divine fish, constructing a vessel to survive the Great Flood. The Greeks had Deucalion, the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Hawaiians, Aboriginal cultures across Australia, and indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest. All of them hold this memory. The vessel shifts shape. The names change. The geography shifts. But the core of the story holds across every version. The world drowned. A remnant survived. And the vessel that carried them came to rest on a mountain when the waters finally fell. You may call one culture's flood story a myth. You may call 2 of them coincidence. You may probably dismiss 10 without much discomfort. Rejecting 200 societies, groups with no contact with each other, separated by oceans and centuries, becomes a different intellectual exercise entirely. Something occurred. The record is too consistent and too widespread to be invented simply. The ground did not match. If the radar was the initial crack, the soil chemistry brought the wall down. The team did what experienced researchers always do. They collected samples from inside the formation's boundary and samples from the slopes immediately surrounding it, then analyzed the chemistry side by side. 2 patches of soil on the same mountain should produce nearly identical results. That is how mountain soil works. The soil inside the formation was not the same soil. Organic carbon levels were elevated far above what the surrounding terrain could account for. There was more decomposed plant and animal material concentrated inside the boundary than the surrounding geology had any mechanism to explain. The mineral profile revealed iron oxides and metallic traces in concentrations that did not match the surrounding bedrock. Even the vegetation on the surface told the story. The grass growing over the formation appeared in a slightly different color. It grew at a different rate. The kind of subtle difference you only notice if you are watching closely, but impossible to mistake once you see it. Something underneath that ground is changing the chemistry of everything above it. Wood, over sufficient time, leaves a distinct signature in the earth around it. It releases carbon back into the soil. It changes drainage patterns. It affects what will grow above it and how fast. The chemical readings from the Durupınar formation are consistent with a massive organic structure that decomposed slowly in place over a very long period of time. Not confirmation, but consistent. The data is consistent with that hypothesis. The team also found pockets of petrified material at multiple points along the formation's perimeter. Material that does not match the volcanic rock forming the rest of the mountain. Samples were pulled and sent to a laboratory. One technician who handled those samples called a colleague that evening and said something he was not cleared to say. He said the material had originally been something that grew. He said he had stopped sleeping. He asked the colleague not to repeat it. The next morning, the samples were moved to a locked cabinet. The technician stopped returning calls. The stones nobody can explain. The site does not end at the boat-shaped ridge. A few miles down the valley, outside a village called Kazan, there are stones, large ones, roughly the height of a two-story building, carved from basalt, weighing multiple tons each. They are standing upright, alone in the open ground, far from any quarry that could plausibly have produced them. There is no recorded ancient civilization in this region with the known capacity to move objects of that mass. Each stone has a hole drilled through it near the top. Not a small aperture, a hole large enough to pass heavy rope through. The local name for these stones, carried down through generations, is anchor stones. The valley's tradition holds that they were dragged behind the ark during the flood to stabilize it against the surge of water. That explanation sounds impossible until you are standing next to one. They are aligned in a line that points directly back toward the formation on the slope above. Several carry crosses carved into their faces. Those carvings date to the early Christian period. The stones themselves are considerably older. Nobody knows who made them. Nobody knows how they were moved. No credible alternative explanation for why these specific objects, with these specific holes, are arranged in this specific valley, pointing at a boat-shaped ridge above, has ever been offered. The man they called God's archaeologist. Long before any radar truck arrived, one man had already dedicated his life to this site and refused to let it go. Ron Wyatt was a nurse anesthetist from Tennessee. No formal archaeological training, no institutional backing, no patience for the people who told him he was wasting his life. In 1977, he saw the aerial photograph in a magazine, the same image that had been quietly circulating since Durupınar first published it. Most people glanced at it and moved on. Wyatt looked at it and made a decision that consumed the next 22 years of his existence. He flew to Turkey. He walked the ridge repeatedly. He brought back samples, fragments he identified as petrified wood. Metallic objects he claimed were corroded structural fasteners, photographs of what he described as ship ribs pushing through the soil. He documented what appeared to be symmetrical, rib-like formations running along both sides of the shape, precisely where a wooden hull's ribs would sit. He gave lectures. He wrote books. His supporters called him God's archaeologist. His critics were less generous. The academic mainstream dismissed him almost entirely. He died in 1999, still insisting he had found what he came looking for. Here is what makes that uncomfortable now. The modern scans of the Durupınar formation, conducted by credentialed researchers, with professional-grade equipment, are not refuting Ron Wyatt's essential claim about the shape. They are confirming elements of it. The dimensions he fixated on are being validated. The internal structure he described is appearing in the radar data. The metallic anomalies he pointed to are showing up in soil analysis. The man may have overreached badly on other claims in his life. On this specific site, at this specific location, the data is no longer dismissing him. The data is asking the same question he spent 2 decades asking, and the people who spent 30 years mocking him are the ones who now have to answer it. When the cameras went in, no previous investigation had cut directly into the formation and sent imaging equipment down into it. The current team did. They selected drill positions based on where the radar maps showed the strongest structural anomalies beneath the surface. The process was methodical. Every bore site was chosen deliberately, cross-referenced against the 3-dimensional subsurface maps the radar team had spent weeks building. Nothing was left to instinct. The drills went down through soil and compacted material, through layers that had not been disturbed in thousands of years. At a certain depth, the resistance changed. Not gradually. Suddenly. The drill bits surfaced, coated with a residue that did not match the surrounding rock. Whatever the equipment had reached was not part of the mountain. It had never been part of the mountain. Then they sent the cameras down. Borescopes, narrow high-resolution instruments with their own light sources, designed to transmit live feedback to monitors at the surface, engineered specifically for this kind of work, for seeing into spaces that have no business being seen. The first images returned nothing but darkness and dust, decades of settled particulate, disturbed by the drilling, catching the light and scattering it back at the lens. The team adjusted. They waited. The focus sharpened. The image on the monitor resolved into structure, chamber walls, a partition dividing the interior space, a corner where 2 surfaces met at something close to a right angle. The geometry was wrong for a natural rock formation. Too deliberate, too consistent. The texture of the walls was inconsistent with raw stone, almost layered, almost grained, the look of a material that had been compressed and slowly mineralized over enormous spans of time. Running across the surface were long, parallel lines, a grain pattern, the signature that wood leaves behind when it has been buried for millennia and turned gradually to stone. Anyone who has ever examined petrified timber under laboratory conditions would have recognized what they were looking at. Several people in that tent had. The cameras went deeper. At roughly 14 feet of depth, the lens reached something that stopped conversation in the tent entirely. A line of dark openings cut into the partition wall at regular intervals, evenly spaced, each one approximately the same size, each one leading into another dark space behind it. The spacing was not random. It had the quality of intention, the quality of design, not gas pockets, not erosion damage. Openings. You could hear the breathing on the audio track shift. The kind of involuntary change in the room when a group of people realizes, at the same moment, that the thing they expected to disprove has just done something a geological anomaly cannot do. At 19 feet, the camera found what appeared to be a horizontal beam crossing the ceiling of the chamber. Dark, straight, showing the same compressed grain texture as the walls. Too straight to be a natural feature, too long to be a mineral vein. It ran across the full width of what the camera could capture and continued beyond the edge of the frame on both sides. Whatever it was had been put there deliberately, placed with purpose a very long time ago. The geologist in the tent leaned forward until his forehead nearly touched the monitor screen. He had been doing this work for over 2 decades. He had a vocabulary for what he was looking at that most people in that tent did not share. He used none of it. He said nothing at all. The researcher beside him, the one who had spent 6 months informing journalists she was there specifically to debunk the site, the one whose institution had funded her presence as a counterweight to what they privately called wishful science, said 4 words aloud: undeniably constructed. Then she looked at the geologist, then back at the screen. Nobody else in the tent spoke. Nobody moved to write anything down. The audio kept recording. The camera kept transmitting. And whatever was at the bottom of that borehole kept existing, indifferent to the silence it had produced in the people above it. Why the site fell silent. The complete footage has not released yet. What the team has said publicly remains measured to the level of surgical precision. The readings are strange. More drilling is needed. The site needs further investigation. Every word in every statement has been selected the way you pick words when you understand that other words, the true ones, the precise ones, would trigger something you are not prepared to trigger, because those are the words you avoid using, even though they are the most accurate ones that describe what is actually there. And so every phrase is carefully controlled to keep what is hidden from coming out too soon. They have not used term Noah's Ark in any official capacity, not ever, not in any press release, any conference statement, or peer-reviewed submission. But the silence surrounding those careful words tells its own story. The same people who were giving weekly press updates have stopped issuing them entirely. The researcher who said, undeniably constructed, inside that tent, has stopped giving interviews. She gave 3 in the weeks after initial drilling began. Next 2, next 1, then none. Her institution has not explained why. Her colleagues will not reveal where she is. When journalists who covered her earlier statements try to follow up, they are redirected to communications offices that do not respond. The geologist has reportedly asked for reassignment to another project in a different country. 2 original survey team members have departed the project without public explanation. Their names have been quietly removed from the project's official records. The petrified samples are stored in a locked cabinet inside an unnamed laboratory. The technician who handled them and called a colleague in distress that night has not spoken to the press. The colleague he called has refused every interview request. The samples have not been submitted for independent testing. Nobody will say when or if they will be. The people who knew the answers are choosing one by one to stop being the people who answer questions. And the institutional silence surrounding them has the quality not of bureaucratic delay, but of something more deliberate, further considered. The kind of quiet that organizations create when they have decided that a specific piece of information is not ready for the world. And within their off-the-record moments, in hotel bars following conferences end, in corridor conversations that halt when recorders appear, at kitchen tables at 2 o'clock in the morning, when the weight of it becomes too heavy to carry alone, the image that comes through is not careful at all. It is something nearer to awe, something nearer to fear. The difference between their public statements and their private ones is not a small gap. It becomes a chasm. Whatever the camera is moving through, the team has not reached the end of it. The structure extends beyond what any of the bore sites have so far captured. The compartments do not end where the scans predicted they might. The scale of what is down there appears with each new feed to be larger than the surface evidence suggested. Whatever is in those rooms has been waiting in the dark for a long time. 5,000 years by the most generous interpretation of the ancient text. Longer for others. It has endured through empires that rose and collapsed without ever knowing it existed. It has waded through wars fought on the ground directly beneath it. It has endured while the people in the valley pointed at the slope and called it the ship and were laughed at by everyone who looked at maps instead of mountains and believed that made them wise. And now there is a camera within it, and the people viewing the feed have gone silent.